Few object when the United States Navy deploys hundreds of heavily armed warships in every one of the world's oceans. No one accuses us of contributing to the weaponization of the sea because they know that the presence of our weapons ensures free transit for all who pursue their peaceful interests. U.S. systems based in space could similarly patrol the commons for the good of all.
The U.S. Air Force has been charged with the mission of ensuring space access and denying space access in times of conflict. Can the United States Air Force do this mission without weapons?
What constitutes a space weapon? How much do we know about the ability of the United States to police the heavens and deny access to others?
Starfire has been used primarily in the past to do research on satellite tracking. Also, they've done a lot of work in astronomy with range finding of stars. So you use the laser to be able to help tell you where the star is and how far away it is. In the budget documents from the Air Force, there has also been mention of the use of Starfire for anti-satellite weapons activities. The Air Force told Congress that it had no intentions of using Starfire for anything related to anti-satellite weapons. However, they are doing a test to make the laser beam very skinny and make it stay very stable as it goes up, and they're going to target that on a satellite. If you're tracking a satellite, you don't need a very skinny laser beam. In fact, you want kind of a wide one because you want to make sure you catch it in the view, right? So many of us here are concerned that this kind of a test is actually an anti-satellite weapons test in disguise.
In April of 2005, the Air Force launched an experimental satellite. Its name was the XSS-11. Theoretically, this experimental microsatellite has the ability to disrupt other nations' satellites. Has it done so? No. Could it do so? En principe, okay? But in reality, we don't know.
One of the things that I think people need to know is that most technology that's used in space can be used either for weapons purposes or it can be used for totally benign, good purposes. Lasers for tracking, good idea, more precise tracking. Small microsatellites that can go around a big satellite and take pictures. Good idea, because it helps you figure out what went wrong with your satellite, and that's hard to do right now. Good idea. That same little microsatellite that's going around the big satellite could be sent up to go around another person's satellite and run into it and kill it. The technology doesn't know whether it's a weapon or whether it's a benign use. The question is going to come down to the intent of the people who are building these systems.
How can we discern peaceful or hostile intentions for any system projected into space? How can we know that the weaponization of space hasn't already begun?
I'm the permanent professor and head of the Department of Astronautics here at the Air Force Academy. And we've been continually teaching the fundamentals of astronautics to our cadets, and every cadet that has graduated from the Air Force Academy almost 40,000 now, have taken at least one course in our department.
This area right here, what's that called? Bow shock, right. And superimposed on this, of course, we have a HEO, highly elliptic orbit.
In military strategy, it shows that if you want to control the battlefield, you need to be the first in seizing the high ground, the most advanced frontier. Whether it be land, sea, air, and now space, the person that controls that has the advantage. So making sure that we can deny our enemies space is a huge advantage.
Military forces have always relied upon high ground technologies to gain advantages. In our own Civil War in the United States, troops in the Army, especially in the Union Army, used hot air balloons to get above the trees and see where the enemy was. And of course, the first airplanes to be used in World War I were essentially reconnaissance craft. They were designed to fly up and look and see where the enemy was placed.
Space then has been called the ultimate high ground, and the advantage to the state that can seize and maintain the high ground is the same as holding the high ground throughout history, whether that was a hill, a mountain, or in the latter half of the 20th century, the air space.
September 6, 1944, armed with over a ton of high explosive, Germany's first tactical rocket, now called the V-2, the vengeance weapon, is fired at London.
Hitler's army pioneered the new high ground with the V-2 rocket. Vengeance Weapon 2 was the first man-made object projected through space, en route to targets in Europe.
Cette fusée a été développée dans le cadre du Troisième Reich. Elle a été utilisée par les armées nazies. À la fin de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, c'était les SS qui étaient en charge d'assurer la réalisation du programme. Les travailleurs qui étaient là, pour une bonne partie, étaient des travailleurs des camps de concentration, avec un des pires camps de concentration de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, qui est le camp de Dora.
A young SS officer, Wernher von Braun, was chief engineer for the design and manufacture of the V-2. This first ballistic missile sparked the interest of a rich patron beyond Germany.
La V2, c'est vraiment considéré à la fin de la guerre comme quelque chose qu'il fallait absolument prendre aussi bien par les soviétiques que par les occidentaux. Et donc von Braun a été récupéré avec une centaine de ses meilleurs ingénieurs dans le cadre d'une opération qui s'appelait Opération Paperclip, c'était le nom de code. Il a été transporté aux États-Unis.
The Pentagon commissioned von Braun and his team of German rocketeers to design an improved version of the V-2. Von Braun spearheaded production of the Redstone, the first American ballistic missile. It propelled him to the highest sphere of military and scientific influence.
Wernher von Braun ultimately became associate director of NASA, and his former Nazi scientists functioned as collaborators with the U.S. military in looking towards space as a new arena of war.
Gentlemen, will you please take your seats so we can begin today's conference? I take a great deal of pleasure in presenting to you today as our guest speaker, Dr. Wernher von Braun.
Gentlemen, the conquest of outer space is the greatest technological challenge of the age in which we live. On the right side of this picture, you see a large wheel-shaped space station. This, of course, offers tremendous possibilities to reconnaissance, and both in the civilian sense as in the military sense.
These Nazi scientists, these Nazi space scientists that came to this country under Project Paperclip, developed schemes to essentially control the Earth from space with space-based weapons.
It seems even feasible to use such a platform in space as a base for the bombing of objects on the ground. And it is my opinion that such bombing could be carried out with an unprecedented accuracy from such a station.
La plupart des ingénieurs allemands qui ont été ainsi, qui sont partis ainsi aux États-Unis, ont été pendant quelques années considérés avec une certaine suspicion, mais ensuite ils sont devenus citoyens américains et ils ont joué un rôle dans le développement de l'espace aux États-Unis, moins des missiles, et von Braun, donc, plus tard, est devenu le grand responsable de la construction des fusées géantes Saturne.
Then, October 4th, 1957, Russia shocks the free world. The USSR hurls into orbit the world's first Earth satellite, Sputnik 1. The Soviets are now the unquestionable leaders in the race for space.
We've been assigned the mission of launching a scientific Earth satellite. I promised the Secretary of the Army that we would be ready in 90 days or less. Let's go, Werner.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
Wernher von Braun met the U.S. military's 90-day deadline. His modified V-2 launched the first American satellite into orbit. The space race was on.
News is flashed of the long-awaited event. America has her satellite in orbit.
How would nations legislate this new realm?
Well, I joined the American Diplomatic Service in 1958, and I was assigned to the United Nations Political Office. And I was 22 years old. I was the youngest Foreign Service officer in the State Department. And they said, why don't you handle the multilateral aspects of our space program? We just put our first satellites into space, and they said, you're in charge. And I said, you've got to be kidding. I'm only 22. And they said, that's your job.
Today, outer space is free. It is unscarred by conflict. No nation holds a concession there. It must remain this way.
Nothing was settled when we started. For instance, who owns outer space? Who owns the moon? Who owns Mars? Was it the situation like Columbus discovering the New World? And he says, I lay claim to America
in the name of the King and Queen of Spain.
Could we do that? Could the Russians do that? So that was a big question. And the other question is, are we going to use outer space for peaceful purposes or for military and aggressive purposes?
We must develop new concepts which enable us, let's say something like 10 years from now, to land parties on the moon to decide whether we want to have a base on the moon for scientific or military purposes. And
we thought to ourselves, can't there be one part, one sector that is free of weapons? But when it got to the peaceful uses question, I ran into the Department of Defense, and they said, no, we don't want to give up the idea of putting weapons into outer space. We'll go along with not having weapons of mass destruction in outer space, but we're not going to sign on a treaty where we can't put up weapons. I lost, the State Department lost, the Department of Defense won, and we ended up with a treaty, the 1967 treaty, which said you can't orbit weapons of mass destruction, but it did not prohibit other weapons.